Hey everybody, Grant Kemp here from CreativeCashFlow.com. What I want to talk about now is what's a typical Subject 2 deal look like? We're talking a lot about Sub2 and the technicalities that go behind it and what you need to know and your LLCs and that kind of stuff. But one of the things that can be really helpful is to really take a look at what's typically happening, right? We've looked at ideal scenarios, we've looked a little bit at thin scenarios and how to make it look. But let's talk about typical. Now, to understand typical, one of the things that you need to understand is basically what are we looking for, right? What's the core of our marketing and that kind of deal. And this graphic tends to be really helpful for newer investors getting into the business, I found. So here's what I like to do when applying a strategy to a deal. You'll hear me talk about this a lot, that I think that you should have a bat belt full of tools that allow you to do a different strategy for a different situation, right? You should always be able to pull out whatever strategy is going to work best for that property and use it on that property. Well, that can be confusing too for a lot of people if you're like, well, when the heck do I use what? So this is the graphic that I've found really helps people to understand, and this is how I kind of look at things. So starting from the top, you've got your retail, your fix and flip. That's one of the strategies that you can use. And I'm going to use that anytime that you've got kind of a 0 to 75% LTV. And when I'm talking about LTV, I mean, I'm really referring to your basis here. In other words, I'm referring to what's the acquisition cost going to be plus the rehab, right? Now, assuming that you got that as a loan, that would be LTV. But we're, kind of interchanging basis and LTV at this point in time. LTV is only three letters, so that's the one that made it onto the slide. But if it's 0 to 75 cents, right? If you're able to get that $100,000 home at 70,000 bucks, all in basis, that's a deal that you should retail, fix, and flip. That's a quick, easy way to make a bunch of money. Moving next down the line, you've got your wholesale properties. If you run into a deal where you're only able to contract that property at maybe 77 cents, well, here in the DFW area right now, wholesalers are able to push stuff out at 80, 82, sometimes 83%, right? Again, basis, refer to our basics videos to understand what I'm talking about on that side of things. But if I contracted at 77, that's too much. I don't want to fix and flip that. You don't have enough room to really make sure that you're going to do well on that flip. So that's something that you can do on a wholesale and still make a good amount of money on real quick. Get paid real quickly on that one. Your buy and holds. That's going to be something where you can buy from 75 to 82%. If you're planning on holding this property for a while, that's why DFW allows the wholesalers to shoot out everything at 82 cents is because, hey, if you're holding that deal for a while, maybe that makes sense for you. Now, again, this is going to be something that you need to evaluate your risk tolerance for to decide if you're willing to go to 82. I typically don't buy at 82, but that's one reason where you can. Now, this is the owner financing side. This is kind of what we're talking about right now. If I'm getting a deal at 82 to basically 105% of its value, that's going to be something that's going to be a prime owner financed candidate. If you've got somebody that owes 90% of what that property is worth, well, that's too much to wholesale, that's too much to fix and flip, but it's just right for an owner financing deal. That's the market that we're looking for, is kind of that lower equity market. That's the market that works really well with Subject 2, which consequently is why Subject 2 works so well in a down market. Right now in DFW, we've seen a white hot market for several years now, and it's not going to last. It's not going to last forever. It can't always be white hot. So what's going to happen is it's going to fall back down. Well, the advantage to knowing Subject 2 is when you know Subject 2, that's actually the strategy that works best in a down market. Everything goes on sale because people need to sell their property. Now all of a sudden, everybody who bought their property a year or 2 years or 3 years ago in this super high market, their values have dropped, and all of a sudden they don't have a huge amount of equity, but they still need to sell their house. So you're there to buy at Subject 2. That's why your acquisitions are able to become so much more frequent on a down market. And then on the flip side, when you're selling it to an owner-financed buyer, well, in a down market, what's one of the first things that happens? Banks shut off. Banks stop lending. So now all of a sudden you've got all these buyers sitting out there that have a lot of money in their bank account that want to buy a house, but the banks aren't lending it to them because their lending regulations get tighter and tighter and tighter in a down market. So not only do you have increased ability to acquire, but you also have increased ability to sell. And that's why Subject 2 is so good in a down market. And that's why you can buy in these higher percentage rates, these higher LTVs, these higher basis, from that 82 to 105%. Now, once you pass 105, then it gets a little challenging to make anything work with subject to. Even, I mean, it's challenging at 100 or 105, but it's almost, borderline impossible past that 105, and that's when you should really start looking into the short sale option. Now, I hate dealing with short sales. Short sales are not my strong suit, and it's they take forever and they tie up your capital and that kind of stuff. I use a company named Oyez, O-Y-E-Z-Z, to handle all my short sales for them. So, contact Oyez, reach out to them, tell them Grant Kemp sent you, because they will handle it all for you. You don't have to do a single thing on it, and they'll make sure that the short sale works. And if it works, you get the deal. And if it doesn't work, say you wanted the deal at whatever, $80,000, and they're able to get the bank to agree to 85. Well, they're going to come to you first, say, hey, I got 85. Can you do 85? If you say no, they'll shoot it out to all their other people who have used them. And if somebody else gets it, they'll split whatever profits they get off of it with you. So it's just kind of a no-brainer to deal with short sales. I always talk about today money versus tomorrow money. The retail fix and flip, that's today money. That's a one-time shot. That's money you're getting right now. I say it's today money you're going to get tomorrow, though, right? Because it's today money, you're not getting long-term cash flow, but you're going to have to wait for it. You're going to have to wait for that rehab to get done. You're going to have to wait for that thing to go on the market, to get sold. You're not going to get that money till tomorrow. Wholesale money, that's today money. You're getting paid next week, you're done. Hold, that's tomorrow money, right? You're not getting a big chunk up front. You're not making your money back for a long time, but over time, that's going to start making you money. That's your tomorrow money. Here's another reason I like owner financing so much. That's today and tomorrow money. Not only are you getting a down payment today, that's a hefty chunk. You're getting 10% of your sales price right now as today money, but you're also setting up cash flow. I mean, I'm averaging $350, $450 per door of pure cash flow, not gross cash flow like a lot of landlords say. A lot of landlords say, hey, I'm paying $600 every month to my bank. My rent is $1,000, therefore I'm making $400 in cash flow. That's bull. You're not making $400 in cash flow. You're getting $400 gross, but you've got an AC that goes out and it costs $4,000. You didn't make any cash flow for that entire year. Now you have to recalculate your cash flow numbers, over your period of time, however long you've had it, and now you might only be making $150 in real net revenues off of this. So don't let gross numbers confuse you. But on cash flow, on an owner finance property, it's true cash flow. You don't have any expenses. You're not paying for repairs. You're not paying for insurance. All of that stuff falls on the buyer. That's the owner of the property's responsibility. So you do get to count that as a net income cash flow. And then on the short sale, that's today money that you're going to get next year. It's going to take you forever to get that thing closed out. Short sales they're just that way. But sometimes that's the right strategy to take in a deal, and you should know how to do it. Now, when looking at this graphic, it's really important to understand you can go one way on this graphic, right? If you get a deal at 70 cents, you can fix and flip it, you can wholesale it, you can hold it, you can owner finance it. You can't short sale it, it's kind of a specific scenario where you have to owe more than it's worth for that to work. But you can go one way on this graphic. What you can't do is you can't go the other way. Let's say that you get a deal at 85 cents. Well, you can owner finance it, but you can't hold it, you can't wholesale it, you can't retail fix and flip it, right? So that's why I've got it in this order, is that you can look at it and say, hey, the lower I get it, the more options I have. I can choose any of these options according to what my needs are right now. If you need some today money, maybe you wholesale it. If you need some today money, you're able to wait for a little bit, maybe you can fix and flip it and get a little bit more, right? If you want to mix that and get a little bit of today and a little bit tomorrow, maybe you just owner finance it out. Maybe you've got it at 60 cents, but you're still going to sell it at full price. You're still going to get a 10% down payment, and now you're just going to have a larger cash flow margin that occurs over the next, 20, 30 years. So one way down the graphic is good, the other way is not. Take a self-inventory of what you have, right? I commonly refer to the yin-yang of real estate investing. You have to have an inventory of what you have and what you don't have. And you need to go find somebody that has the things that you don't and work with them so that together you make a whole and you can actually get some deals done. Do you have cash or access to cash? Well, now the foreclosure and the distressed game is available to you. Life is going to be a lot easier in this scenario because, hey, if you can hit foreclosures and you can just buy these properties up and get them ready to go before the foreclosure hits with the cash that you've got available to you, that's awesome. Like I always say, buying foreclosures, kind of shooting fish in a barrel. You've got this ready-made inventory ready for you to go right there. But what if you don't have cash? Well, here's the thing. It's the same leads. It's the same houses. You're just going to take a little bit of a different strategy, a little bit of a different approach to it whenever you're buying those houses. If you don't have cash, you're on hard mode, okay? It's all about disposition. It's all about how you're going to sell that property at this point in time. You're going to have to really put some puzzle pieces together to make this work. You're going to have to buy and sell planning on discounts if you don't have cash, okay? Obviously, you've got to buy with a discount, right? You've got to buy so that you've got a margin in there, some room for you to make money. But if you don't have any money to put into the rehab of this property either, just get ready because you're going to need to sell with a discount too. You're going to need to back that margin off so that the person buying it had some room and a reason to buy it. My first 40 or 50 properties were done this way. My first 40 or 50 properties, I didn't put a single dollar out of my back pocket into a deal because I was leveraging and I was finding puzzle pieces and putting them together and structuring these deals like I've told you to structure on the front funding video and on the net negative video of how you can really structure a deal like a wholesaler, right? And have your buyer have an option contract, have your seller under option contract, find your buyer, close at that point in time, and then start making money. But if you can't put the money in for the rehab, you've got to account for that because your buyer's not going to pay full price for a house that's not fixed up, okay? Option contracts are the go-to here. That's the big puzzle piece to it. If you don't have the capital to take a deal down immediately, you've got to get everything under an option contract with your seller so that you have time to market the deal, look for a buyer, hope that you can find some other puzzle piece to make this deal work. And if you can't, then you've got the ability to back out and it's no harm, no foul. Plan to do the discounts, right? Discounts equal to the materials or about half of what the full rehab would be. That's about standard for what you're going to be discounting whenever you're looking for selling an as-is property to a consumer. So one of the advantages of doing owner financing, like we've spoken about before, is that the majority of your buyers, they're already in a market where they are handymen. They are able to do some fixing up and that kind of stuff. So if you can discount them the materials that it would take to get that rehab done, a lot of them are going to say, cool, I'm in on that. The market is changing. I'll be honest, right now over this past couple of years, I'm seeing more and more where people they are unwilling to buy those as-is houses, right? So maybe now you're starting to have to do a little bit more of a discount on that, and that's where this half of the full rehab would come in, right? What you'll find once you start doing a lot of rehabs, what you'll find is that very little of that rehab budget is actually in materials. You're paying labor. Labor is the really big expense. I mean, 90% of your cost of a rehab is in labor. So when you're running into the situation now where people really want that house to be fixed up, if you can discount about half of what that full rehab would be, labor and materials included, that's a little bit more enticing to a buyer to come in and do, right? But again, it depends on the market, it depends on what area you're in and who you're seeing come through. But the important thing is that on your acquisition, you've got it under an option contract so that if it doesn't work, if you're not able to find somebody who's willing to buy it as is, you're able to cancel that contract, no harm, no foul. What's the typical deal look like on a subject to property? Well, the first most large indicator here is going to be that they're behind on payments. They may or may not be facing foreclosure, right? They may be $6,000 behind and not actually in a scenario where the foreclosure is imminent, but they're going to be behind on payments, most likely. They're going to have some equity. Now, like I've said before, the less equity they have, the more subject to it's going to be. Because if they've got a ton of equity, let's say that they owe $60,000 on a house that's worth $150,000, what does it make for them to sell you their house and leave their property in their name and not accept any cash on top of that, right? It doesn't make any sense. They can go to just any wholesaler, any cash buyer, and get cashed out immediately and have some cash on top of that go into their pocket. But when they don't have that equity, when they are somebody that owes 85, 90, 92% of what that property is worth, that is where subject to really comes into place because you can just take over on those payments, catch them up, and get them taken out of a bad situation, right? You're actually giving them something. You're offering something to them at that point in time. And that offer is, hey, I'm getting you out of a rough spot. Now, because of the education that you have, you're going to be able to capitalize on that deal and turn that into money for yourself, but they don't know all the intricacies of owner financing and what goes into that stuff. So they're kind of stuck. They're like, hey, I need to get out of this property and I can't sell it retail in time to get away from this foreclosure or to make enough money to pay myself off, that kind of stuff. So that's what we're looking for. The home is going to be in a median price range neighborhood. Now in the DFW area right now, that's an $80,000 to a $250,000 house. You don't want to be in the war zones, but you also don't want to be in that kind of mid-high to high range house, right? We're looking for the majority. What is the majority of the population going to be able to buy? The majority of the population is not able to buy that $500,000 house. there's only so many people that can buy that, and then it kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger as time goes on, to where you've got this big chunk of buyers in that 80 to 250 range that are ready and willing to buy. Now, I don't like going below 80 because you run into a whole different set of problems at that point of time that I don't like messing with. So I'm kind of in that 80 to 250 range, and what I want to do is show you some examples of what that house looks like, because that's going to be a different house in DFW than it is in California, right? An $80,000 house in California is a porta potty. But here, what that's going to get you is something like this. This is an older frame home. I made a ton of money on this house over in an area called Oak Cliff. This one actually, too, was in Oak Cliff as well. It made a ton of money on it. This is a brick home, but it's an older home. It's kind of in that median. You know, you're not expecting to get shot if you go out there, but it's not going to have the best school system, right? This one's out in Garland, which is another one that we've made just a killing on. This one was in Mesquite. Again, older, not the most beautiful home, but everybody can buy it. And you want to know what I see in every one of those pictures is a stack of gold. That is our house. That is what we're looking for. We're looking for those like 1,200 square foot. Doesn't care. I don't care if it's brick. I don't care if it's frame. I don't care how old the property is. I want it in an area that people want to live and that there's a large amount of people looking. So how are we actually going to structure this deal out, right? How are we going to figure it out on a technical standpoint of what we're going to do to buy it, to go from step 1 to step Z, to find how we're going to get this thing done. So step 1 is obviously contracting the seller. Now, when we contract the seller, we're going to do it under a 60-day option period, and we're going to use contracts that are the state promulgated form. So in Texas, that's the TREC contract that you're used to buying every house with. It's about 9 pages long, and every property that gets sold in Texas is going to use that same form. And then you're going to add an addendum to it that talks about all the specificities of owner financing and subject to. You really need to work with a good attorney that's in your state, that knows your state local laws. Here in Dallas, here in Texas, I recommend using Horn & Associates. Now, full disclosure, I'm business partners with Scott Horn, but I was doing deals with him before I was business partners with him because he's the guy to go to with the subject to stuff. I mean, he's been in the business longer, knows more about the ins and outs, has really good protective contracts for you. But there are several other people that do this in the state. You know, Galen Rogers is one. Trace Moss down in San Antonio is another one that you can use. So there are other people that are familiar with this stuff. I just use Scott Horn for my own deals. And make sure that these contracts allow you to market during your option period. Like I said, I get a 60-day option period on all of my properties. That gives me 2 months to put a sign in the front yard, to put stuff on Craigslist, to start sicking all my buyer's agents out there and finding me a buyer for that property. Which, you know, a lot of you guys, when you hear that, you're like, golly, 2 months, what the heck? Because you're used to the 5, 7, 10-day option period, right? But one of the things that we've got to think about here is that our sellers don't do this every day. They don't have kind of that baseline that says, hey, the norm is 7 days and that's all I'm going to do on this, right? What it's all about is giving people all the information to the deal and making a deal work for both of you. Now, for me, for the deal to work for me in this situation, I want a 60-day option period. That's what I want. And if that works for the seller too, gravy. And so I'm going to bring it up. Now, we talk about this in the negotiation series too, but I'm going to bring it up here as well, where we've all been around little children, right? Little kid running through the living room, all the adults are sitting around chatting. The kid falls and scrapes his knee. And the first thing they do is they're gonna look up and they're gonna see how the adults react. And if the adults are all like, oh my gosh, are you okay? The kid starts crying and bawling and everything. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to him. But if the adults just keep having their drink and just kind of laugh it off and say, oh, get up, go have fun. You know, the kid might give you one of these like, but then they get up and they start running on. We're dictating the response that we get from people a lot of times, right? So if you go to somebody and you've got this contract and in your mind you're like, man, I always get a 7-day option period, but I'm about to ask this person for a 60-day. And so you go to them and you're like, yeah, so, and this section right here, I have 60 days. I've got 2 months where I can back out at any point in time, and it's going to give me the ability to do that if I don't find a buyer. Well, of course, they're not going to say yes to that, right? But if it's just matter of fact and it's just part of how you contract your houses and you're going through the whole contract and you say, okay, so for the next 60 days, that's going to be an option period for myself. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to market to try and find a buyer to buy this from me. Once I find that buyer, I'm going to let you know, and then we'll go to closing at that point in time, right? I presented all the information to them. If they're okay with it, cool. They may come back and say, whoa, 60 days, heck no. And in that case, then you start your negotiations. But as you bring it up in the first place, it's just part of the business. It's just part of your contract. It's part of what you need to make this deal work, and that's all that matters. And if they disagree with that, then you start the negotiation. But don't give them a reason to start that negotiation by you coming up with and then, this is going to be, if you lead them into them thinking that this should be something they care about, they're going to care about it. So be very careful about that. In many assets of how you're presenting yourself in these negotiations, you're leading them a lot of the times. It's kind of like you going into a car sale situation. You don't buy a car every day, but that car salesman, he sells cars every day. And so a lot of times you're looking for him to lead the conversation and see how things go, and now you're in that situation. You're leading the conversation. You're dictating how things go, right? So back to the point here, we've got a 60-day option period. During that option period, we're going to be marketing to find our buyer. Now, that signature happens, and then we start marketing for our buyer. We're going to put yellow bandit signs out. I like yellow over white. We're going to put signs in the front yard that say this house is for sale. We're also going to put dueño a dueño, which means owner to owner in Spanish. That's one of our big buying markets is going to be people who are Spanish speaking first. Typically, 90+% of my market of buyers, Spanish is their first language, and so use that. Understand who your demographic is and market to them. Whenever you're putting a bandit sign out, you're going to ask permission from anybody whose yard you're going to put this in, right? So what you're also looking for is yards on the corner of major intersections. So whatever corner it is that goes from the major intersection into your neighborhood, you want to have a sign out there that says there's an owner financed house up the street, right? With an arrow, owner financing, and a phone number and an arrow, right? Now, if you ask permission from the person that's there and say, hey, I've got a house for sale up the street. Can I put the sign out in your yard for a couple of weeks? They're going to say yes. I've never had a problem with that. And then your sign stays out there. What I discourage you from doing is putting signs out in public land, whether that's a median or whatever, because a lot of times that does go against code and you are violating code, and you can get fined for that. That can be a trouble for you. So just make sure you know where you're going. Make sure you know what your local codes are and adhere to those. But always, if you ask permission, you're fine and you're good to go. And then Craigslist obviously is going to be a big place for marketing to find buyers. After you put your marketing out there and you find your buyer, you're going to contract that buyer again with a state promulgated form and again with an addendum. Now this addendum is typically pretty similar to your addendum that you used on your acquisition, but there's going to be a few little changes here and there. So you just want to again make sure that you're using the right contracts on both acquisition and disposition, and you're going to contract that buyer. Once you contract that buyer, you are going to send that buyer to your RMLO, your residential mortgage loan originator. Okay, this is going to be what keeps you in compliance with Dodd-Frank and all the state, local, and national laws that go along with being a lender. Now, I founded Texas Pride Lending. So obviously I know how they run, I know how they operate, and I've trained the people that were there to work in the way that I know works for owner financing. So therefore, I'm going to recommend Texas Pride Lending. I sold that company a couple of years ago, so I no longer am involved with it, but I know what they're doing and I know they do things the right way. There are other people out there that do also have RMLO services, and you can research and find people on your own on that side of things. But what's going to happen is you're going to send this contract and your buyer to your RMLO. The RMLO is going to take the loan application, and they're going to do all the processing that says, hey, we need to know this person's credit report, we need to know their income and verify it, all that kind of stuff. Now, watch my Dodd-Frank video because I want to be very specific and very clear to you. You are the one that's approving your buyer, not the RMLO, not Texas Pride Lending. Texas Pride Lending's job is to present you with the information. The way that Dodd-Frank is written allows us as small creditors to basically put anybody in. But we've got to do our due diligence, and we have to verify that the things that they're telling us are true. There are some some things that we need to stick to, like you don't want to do balloons, and there are interest rate things that you want to be aware of, that kind of stuff, and I'll talk about that in the Dodd-Frank video series. But for the most part, we're very laxed on what the government tells us we can and can't approve. So while we have to do the approval and we have to send it to an RMLO, a lot of things like the debt-to-income ratio. As small creditors, we don't have a legal DTI cap. We could legally put somebody in there and have a qualified mortgage at a 95% debt-to-income ratio and still have that qualified mortgage. So again, watch the Dodd-Frank video, find out how all that goes. But that's the next step. You send your contract, you send your buyer to your RMLO, they do the processing, they send you the information back. Once you approve your buyer for that, you're going to then notify your seller, hey, I found a buyer, I'm good to go, we're ready to close. Part of your contract says that your seller's obligated to close with you once you give them that notification. So at that point in time, you go and you close with the seller in the morning, and then you're going to close with your buyer in the afternoon. You may only own this property for 30 minutes, 2 hours, something like that. And that is key to getting these kinds of things done because your liability is so much lower at that point in time. That's kind of the ideal situation. We want to buy the house. We don't need to own it forever. We just need to make money off of it, right? It's not about owning houses, it's about making money in real estate. Let me just put this slide up, which is the understatement of the century. Having money makes life easier. Never put a dollar into a home that you don't own. This is really important to me to get this across to you because a lot of people are going to say, well, I've got this house under contract and it really just needs carpet and that'll make people more willing to buy it. So I'll just go ahead and I'll put the carpet in there for $2,000 and then I'll find a buyer. If you don't own that house, if you don't close on that property and you put carpet into that deal, your seller may say, hey, I kind of like this house now that it's got new carpet and I'm not going to close with this person anymore. And you just spent $2,000 that you're never going to get back. So never put a single dollar into a property that you don't already own. If you're going to put money into the deal, watch the front funding video, understand what you're doing, and then if you want to front fund it, if you want to put that money in, cool, go for it. But you got to have that reason, right? Being able to front fund and fully rehab that deal typically is going to sell the property faster. That is going to help you get that property sold because people don't want to have to deal with all the work. They don't want to go in there and have to do the full rehab on a house that they want to live in. So if you've got the cash and access to cash that you can do that with, it is going to get your property sold more quickly for you. And then there's a peace of mind of doing a proper rehab, right? If you sell a house as is, you don't know what that person's going to do to it to get it fixed up, right? They may not do much of anything at all. And then if they stop paying you and you have to take that property back, that could turn tricky because they may have done a crap rehab job on it. And now you're taking that property back and now you might have to spend even more on a rehab than you would have initially. And that's not a good situation to be in. Sometimes the ROI of a rehab just makes this obvious. You know, I've had a couple of properties where, hey, if I don't do any rehab on it, I'm going to sell it for $75,000. Or if I put $8,000 into it, I can sell it for $95,000. Well, that makes sense. I'm spending, $5,000, $8,000 and making 20 off of it. That's a good ROI. So keep those things in mind too. If you're looking at comps on your house and you notice, okay, look, my house has carpet, but all these other houses that have carpet sold for 80, but then every house in this neighborhood that has hardwood sold for 115, maybe it's worth putting those hardwoods in because you're going to get that money back and more. If you've got investors, that's going to be a huge asset to you. Even if you don't have the capital yourself, having those investors is going to be a huge asset. Start networking, start finding other people that might have, you'd be surprised how many people have cash that don't have the ability to buy houses. You're going to be really shocked at that number of people because a lot of people have self-directed IRAs or have IRAs that they can convert into a self-directed IRA. And they may have $50, $100, $200, $600,000 sitting there ready to use. And you'd be very surprised at the people that have this kind of cash available to them and they may want to lend it to you. So if you don't have capital, start networking, start finding deals and saying, hey, look, I've got this deal right here and I need this money and this is what I'm willing to pay for it. Watch my private lending video so that you can understand more about how that is all structured. But there's a lot of those people out there. And if you find yourself one of those people, if you are that person sitting there with a 401k that you want to convert or an IRA that you want to convert or a self-directed IRA that's already there, and you're looking for ways to make money on that money while you're learning how to do this before you're able to go kind of do it on your own, that's where I come into play as well. I mean, most of my deals at this point in time are done through people like yourself that have that IRA that want to lend it and just want to make the money. And that's truly the passive income, right? When you are a lender and you're not even doing any of the real estate investing side of things, you're just making your money make money for you. For that, you can contact me, Grant, at creativecashflow.com, and we'll chat. We'll have a talk and see if it works for both of us, right? What are your typical numbers? What's the typical number of one of these kinds of deals that you're doing subject to? Well, typically I'm going to be looking at a house that's somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000 behind. The rehab is going to fall into a couple of different categories. Usually you're either going to have nothing that needs to happen to it at all. I mean, this house is in perfect shape. You're able to just have somebody move into it immediately. Or you're going to need like $5,000 to $7,000 worth of work. You might have to fix up a bathroom and replace the flooring. Maybe you need to repaint some stuff, your pretty basic stuff. Or you're looking in that like $25,000 to $30,000 range. You know, when we're looking at these homes that are in the 1,000 to 1,200-ish square foot range, if it needs a full rehab, we're looking at like 30 grand, right, for that full rehab. So I'm typically running into one of these three areas for rehab on a subject to property. And then we look at our typical buyer. You know, I mentioned a little bit of it earlier, but one of the big indicators is they're self-employed, because banks don't like lending to self-employed people, right? Self-employment is a very difficult thing to become bankable with. Typically, they have an ITIN number, which is an individual taxpayer ID number, which means that they don't have a social, but they are paying taxes. They are paying into the system. This isn't a requirement legally, but it is a requirement of mine. If I'm going to sell a house to somebody here, I want to make sure that they're paying into the system with the money that they're making, right? So I want a taxpayer ID number, and I do want to see that their taxes are being filed. That's part of my underwriting requirements. Even though it's not a legal underwriting requirement, I think that you should take the same stance as well. There's plenty of buyers out there that way. They're usually going to have 10% down plus the closing costs, okay? And that's what you need to ask for, is 10% plus closing costs, because you want to have your 10% come in, and they need to cover all the expenses for what's going to happen with closing that deal up for you. There are creative ways to go about that. Let's say that you need $10,000 as a down payment and you need $3,000 in closing costs. There are ways that you can handle that if they only have $10,000 in their bank account. Watch some of our videos on the advanced series to figure out what I'm talking about there, because you can set up second liens, you can do different, creative situations to make sure that not only are you getting your cash, but you're also getting interest on it, and you're securing your interest at the same time. You're making sure that you're not getting taken advantage of. Most of these guys are handymen, landscapers, they own maid companies. That is, 90% of my buyers own one of those three types of companies. One of the two of them does. Either the husband or the wife owns one of these companies. So that's kind of your typical demographic of people who are going to be buying from you in the owner-financed world as well. So we've talked about a lot of information now on a typical deal, right? What a typical subject to looks like, what a typical wraparound looks like. Even though in a lot of our other videos, we're talking about what might be a prime scenario or a thin scenario. This is what usually you're going to be running into. So I'm glad that you're watching this kind of stuff, because it's going to help you start to get a grasp of what exactly it is that you need to be marketing to on both sides, acquisition and disposition, right? Knowing this kind of information is the stuff that you need to sit down at your computer and write notes on when you're creating your marketing plan and say, how am I going to most accurately buy properties? Well, the typical deal looks like this, so how can I find that guy, right? That's the information that you need for it. So as always, find us, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. Like, share, make sure that you're interacting with us. I want to know about your success stories. Send it to me, grant@creativecashflow.com. I want to know what success stories you're finding out there, what things are working for you, so that we can continue to work together and build this relationship. So keep on watching these videos, and until next time, we'll talk to you then.